All right. Well, thanks for hopping on the Code Review Weekly Workshop. We're going to talk about some code review stuff. And let me share my screen. I had something come up. Uh, we had a couple of MRs that were back to back touching this component, this toggle component. One was kind of refactoring altogether what the disabled state was, but then the other one is adding this like description thing here. So you see on the left-hand side doesn't have the enable disable dark mode description prop. So when I test things, I think we've talked before, is I don't ever check out the branch, or when I'm reviewing code, I never really check out the branch. I apply the MR's diff changes on top of the main or master branch. And what that uncovered when I tested this out was under the disabled state, this new prop wasn't getting disabled color change. And this is because of the refactoring that was done in the previous MR. Previously, we did this one big like opacity filter over the whole component that just made it all a little grayer. So this thing would have naturally had it and would have worked. But when this bit changed, the CSS changed under the hood, all of a sudden, since the time that this MR was opened, that disabled state isn't looking right anymore. So this obviously like brings up, I think, lots of interesting takeaways of how MRs can conflict with each other without actually having hard merge conflicts. Catching that is really, really hard, but it can go a long way just when you're testing something. It's very small effort to just see if you can apply the diff on top of master and main instead of just checking out the branch. Because then you have a higher chance of these things coming up if and when they do come up. Yeah.
So would I don't do front end tests very often. Would front end testing have caught that? And is it typical to have a front end test that checks like that level of, I don't know what, CSS-iness?
Yeah, you bring up another great question, and that is that no, visual testing might have, but the issue is that this is a new thing, so we don't have previous visual testing for it. And so we'd be really dependent on, do we have a visual snapshot of the new thing under the disabled state, which we didn't, because it's like visual testing is expensive, so you don't want to do it for all the permutations. But in the main GitLab project, we only do visual testing at this level of like the color pixel level. I don't even think we don't do snapshots on the main GitLab repo. Do we, Paul?
No, I don't think we do.
Yeah, no. So we don't do on the. It's only in this GitLab UI package that we actually do pixel diffing snapshot tests.
But we're trying to be smart about the stories, right? Whenever we add a new feature to a component, it should be included in some story if possible, and that story should be visually. Well, I guess tested for visual regressions. So hopefully this is in a new story. I don't know if it is, but yeah, it should be tested in some way.
But I think the color, there are a set of CSS effects that are just really hard to test, and you're not going to be able, like, CSS. That's what makes it a little challenging. Is it's really easy to change. It's very hard to test. And you can end up where the effect is everything looks broken, but it still works. But it's because some CSS issues. So reviewing CSS and testing it can be a little bit of a chore we try to keep that's one of the reasons why we lean on doing the utility classes stuff, because then changes are very, very scoped to what they're applied to, not the whole everything referencing those stuff. So
yeah, I'm also curious about the pajamas guidelines for this, because this feels like a very new pattern to mute the labels and the descriptions as well as the interactive elements, right? So is this becoming a common pattern which should be applied to every disableable input? Like if you have a text input, should we mute the label too?
I believe so. Yeah, he was referenced. So this is from one of our UX designers. And so there was some previous conversation and I even asked too, I think in something, but this got UX reviewed by Pedro. So I think we are kind of moving towards some sort of direction here. But I think it's here you see that I do kind of raise a UX question or UX issue, and it's worth also taking away of like, hey, this is a UX designer. They're kind of like the DRIs for this stuff. I could have just not said anything and just assumed they UX reviewed it. But it kind of violates all sorts of our GitLab values of like, no, it's just everyone can contribute and let's just bring it up and talk about it. And so, yeah, cool. Thanks for letting me share this example. Does anyone have any other examples of code review that they'd like to share that were interesting?
I was actually curious about the MR that you just showed. And you mentioned that this was created by a UX person. Was this is this a usual case that a UX would create MRs?
It's a good question. I would say it's not unusual. And so I guess it is usual when I resolve the negatives there. Yeah, I would say that it happens commonly. And from front end perspective, it's actually like our desired outcome. I would like to make the front end so easy to contribute to that UX, when they have an idea, they could just implement it. Like that would be the ideal. So yeah, that's a good question. And I think part of that is everyone can contribute. So we don't want UX to have a thick wall between engineering and vice versa.
Fair enough. Thanks.
I don't know. Terry, are backend engineers allowed to make database migrations?
Oh yeah.
Some
people they do it regularly. But I think it's always a part of the issue. I have actually, I've done front end work. I don't like it, but I've done it. And if I see something that's small enough and easy enough, and just kind of like, there's a label that I saw one of my team member or teammates using called like stuff that should just work. And sometimes I'll throw that on MR if I'm like, okay, like this should just work. I'm just going to fix it. And it's small, so.
Yeah. Man, that's a good label. It'd be really interesting to analyze, what MRs have
stuff that should
60 plus comments that also have the label of stuff should just.
Yeah, I think though I've not run into those that he's done, but a lot of stuff I'm like, oh, because it's kind of like a balance when you're like, I found a problem. If it's a one-line fix, you should fix it right then. It's like, because if it turns into like a 60 thread MR, then like maybe your initial assessment wasn't right and you should have made an issue. But yeah, I feel like it's fine. I make docs MRs too, and I've seen people from other teams, like support team members, they'll make like code change MRs, and I feel like those are always really welcome. They know, they know development, they know Ruby, and they have sometimes I feel like a closer tie to like the customer experience than we do.
Yeah.
We dog food our own stuff, but I don't know. I feel like they do have a closer tie.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to like deny anyone the ability to create MRs. It's not about that. It's more like understanding like how different roles are, like what are the scope of things that a different role can do. Like I was under the impression that the UX would not commit any code,
Yeah.
because that's
Yeah.
what I'm used to in different companies.
Yeah.
Yeah, but here it seems like UX is something different, and so that's what I've learned from this. Like it could be also like a front-end engineer in some ways, right? Because
Yeah.
committing to front end, then you're doing front end, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think,
I also,
and that's
go
a,
ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, I do want to clarify too. I don't think it's on anyone's expectation that, because I think having code writing abilities is a plus for those roles, but I don't know if I want to clarify that I don't think we expect non-engineers to write code, but we highly encourage and are there to collaborate, and all of that is great. And so it does go a long way when you can and do. But it's not a expectation. But because of our culture, we have so many people that just do want to go the extra mile and do things like that. So it's people want to learn. So it does happen a lot, and in a great way. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, and I wonder about like whether like I don't know how people get into UX, but I feel like maybe some of them may have had front end first or something. I don't know. You like it's like almost like you never know what someone's background is, so they might have fallen into UX after falling in love with it from doing a different development type.
So
and
this is
the boot camps kind of give you like a huge array of knowledge.
This is very true. So this brought up just this conversation. I kind of have two topics that I'd like to bring up. Does anyone have any? I don't want to hog the agenda though. Does anyone have anything else that they would like to bring up?
Like just as an additional comment to what you said, Paul, like for a backend engineer, it's basically hard to not create an MR without a database migrations nowadays. So it's
no.
Yeah, so it's not like, it's definitely a part of what every backend engineer must do.
Before you start, Paul, I do have one question that's an MR review question, but I don't want to look at the MR per se. I'm trying to find it.
I'll put yours in the agenda before my two things that just came to my mind.
Okay. Does anyone else here MR coach? And no.
I am. I thought the other Paul was too, but I guess not.
I don't think I am. Let me check. No,
all right.
I mean, I'll throw the MR in there, but essentially, I'm not sure how folks would approach this, and it's really about like how to continue a community contribution MR, where there's something that needs to be completed that's not done, but they have no way to look at it. This is a database review, and I kind of like went down this, for database reviews, there's a pipeline job that you pretty much need to run before like it can be sent to a maintainer that does a bunch of checks and runs the migrations, and it prints a nice little message with timings and things like that. This one didn't run, and I'm like not sure why. Wait, I think 4 days later, the author pinged me, and I'm like, oh, it didn't finish. So I kind of went to the database team to ask if they could help look at why, and they said there's some migrations that this MR needs to be completed, but they're not done. They're background migrations. So I went and checked. Both of them are at like 10 and 15%. I don't know when they'll be done, but now I have this MR that's in this like very strange state where like I am the reviewer. The author can't check the status of their background migrations. Do I just set a calendar reminder? So, I mean, I left them a note and I was like, well, I'm not really sure what the process is here, but I mean, I asked in the MR coach channel and got like no answers. So I'm like, okay, I guess it's on me to try to figure something out, but I don't know if anyone's kind of run into a situation like that before.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've definitely run into this before, but not with database migrations. So this is all news to me. I was like, wow, we have to do some MRs have to wait for background migrations to run.
Yeah, I think it's
That's
like
a
when
thing.
there are some migrations that they do in stages where it's like this thing happens and then you can like build on top of it, but it has to like the first thing has to finish. I also have no
I see.
experience with writing those. But maybe I'll just set a calendar reminder in like 2 weeks to go check it.
Well, so what I think you could do is potentially like set notifications on it and like snooze an email about it.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've had to do in the past, we've had community contributors, and I think this was a GHU contribution, that was removing a feature flag, which we never enabled. And
Mm-hmm.
so I kind of just brought up the suggestion of like, we should probably enable this because that's kind of what we do with feature flags before we just remove it.
Mm-hmm.
And so because they're on the wider community contributing to it and not as ingrained with our process, and they can't just manage the feature flag enabling and stuff, I kind of had to do that. But then I also set a time of like, okay, we're going to wait like a couple of days for this. And yeah, I think I just left it assigned to me. Like, so but that'll run into issues if you have an MR assigned to you and you use the number system to like measure your capacity. You'll be one less capacity for a while. But yeah, I just left it assigned to me because I always try to clean out all those MRs that I'm assigned as a reviewer regularly. So yeah, those are interesting cases.
Yeah, it seems like a super outlier, but I think, yeah, I appreciate the feedback. But I think what I'm going to do is I'll leave them a note saying I'm setting a calendar reminder in 2 weeks, and I'm just going to do that. I don't know how long it's
That's
going to
great.
take for these to be done, so we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, that's a hell of a lot of the data that like on .com that you're needing to wait for it to upgrade in the migration, which isn't prioritized. Like I'm not surprised it takes a while. I'm surprised that wow, we have to wait for that. That's just interesting. Very interesting.
I kind of have a follow-up question to this one. Just curious. So this cannot run because there was another MR that was merged and it didn't finish running. Is that how it?
Yeah, so there's I guess I didn't catch there was a previous migration to add like a column to namespaces that's a batched background migration, and I think this is ensuring that it's finished, and it's using that like method check to I'm not 100% sure about exactly how it got to this point, but let me see if I can get the issue. And I didn't catch it in the MR review. But I guess I'm not sure what finalizing a batch migration does. Maybe that allows the column to like be used to say like, okay, we did a background migration. We want to mark it as like completed. We want to mark it as finalized. But yeah, I kind of felt like it was really difficult, I guess, for community contributors. They have no window to look at the batch background migration list. And I only just learned that we could do it through chat ops, I guess, commands. So I don't do database work most of the time. I don't do migrations very often. So I hadn't run into this. And I'm not sure if you do in your role.
Yeah, I was going to say, how do you do this? Like, how do you how do you dodge the bullets? Because
Oh, I'm working in Elasticsearch, which is like, that's what backs a lot of the search calls. And so while we do work on the database, but it's mostly we're just using it for non-elastic calls. I mean, but we still, you know, we can still impact it by not using indexes and not like preloading data and things like that. But that's one of the reasons why I signed up as a database reviewer, because you know, I wanted exposure to it since I don't work with it very often. And it's wild here.
I do feel like, you know, hey, it's something if the pipeline isn't failing. Like that's there's room for improvement there of something
the
we could do.
database teams said that they were working on improving the messaging coming back from that, because it kind of goes off into the ether and you don't really get any notification when something fails. And also, I don't think anyone but them has permission to look at the pipeline that is linked.
Wow.
So, but they did say that they're working on improving it. But my mode of operation in that point is if it doesn't come back in a day, I'm going their channel and be like, somebody please help me look at what happened.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's tough. Man, database migrations when they fail on .com.
Oh, I don't want to talk about that.
That's tough. Wow. Cool. No, this is good. This is a good, interesting thing to bring up. Thanks for bringing it up, Terry. Maybe somewhat related. We were talking about like people's roles but often crossing that and finding this very open collaborative space. Something that I see come up often between our back end and front end split is sometimes a front end engineer finds a very front end solution to something that maybe was a very simple, we should add a database field for this. And it's not that scary. Like maybe the front ender is just adding some local storage field for something as opposed because our front enders, I think in large we're not regularly looking for the full stack solution to a problem, and we'll just use the tools that we're most familiar with. So those are interesting sometimes to as a maintainer to review and to almost kind of go back to the very top of challenging our assumptions of, I see we did all of this in a front end way, but it has these user facing issues. If we do it this way, this really needs to be persisted in the backend if we can, or we got to do backend validation for this kind of thing, for these edge cases, whatever it is. Sometimes that just spins up in follow-ups, but even though I think our specific roles, like I guess I get paid to write the bugs on the front end, and I don't get paid for the bugs I write on the back end. The users are well served if we all kind of continue to promote the full stack perspective, because I think that just allows us to use the best tool for the best job. And this does come up in code review. So I would just encourage everyone to, as you review code, if it's a front end solution that it seems maybe more fit to be a backend solution, like, yeah, definitely bring it as a question to be considered as why didn't we go this way? And maybe there's reasons for it, and maybe no, we just didn't consider it. And this is why we have code review. So
like, can I jump in?
Yeah, please do. Please do. Sorry.
Just like from my experience, usually we have usually there are pretty straight rules of what piece of validation should be done in front end and what should be done in the back end. Sometimes there is a double up. It probably is good good.
Yeah, 100%. No, it is. Yeah.
Double up, but it like the backend should really do the validation, right? It's that's usually, although the original validation, let's say, done by the front end, like there is no need to pass in a request that will obviously fail, is basically the validation that we should do on the front end. So I was just wondering, because you said that we sometimes come up with different solutions in the front end that maybe should be in the back end. Isn't there like a kind of like an outline of what type of problems we can keep in the front end, but what we should definitely push to the back end?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. And I think the category of problems I see most often are single source of truth problems. And it's where the backend is really the single source of truth for some sort of like, I'm just going to come up with an example, but like based on this, like all of this merge request state implying some sort of flag needing to show up or whatever on the front end. Often what we'll do in the front end is just work around whatever non-normalized state kind of things we get from the back end, and we don't even because some of the especially like on models like the merge requests, they're so large and wonky that we're scared to touch it. But sometimes the problems we run into is these truths we're getting from the back end aren't normalized, and we need to address the single source of truth problem for how do we calculate X. And very much we'll just calculate it right there in the front end, when it's in reality is like, okay, no, maybe we need to really untangle some of the stuff in the back end. And obviously depending on like the urgency and how much of a bug like something's fixed, it's a thing. But I see single source of truth problems come up a lot. And so like even doing a level of soft permission checking on the front end can be a thing. And I think for the most part, our front enders, the more they've contributed to GitLab, they see, I think, the kind of class of problems that are better solved here and elsewhere. But I think the biggest question I think is worth just prompting for this is just what's the single source of truth for X? Usually it's the back end where I'm getting X. And so it's really worth considering, do we need to change that? Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have a great answer. And no, we don't have like a great guide for it. Maybe we do. Maybe we do. I don't know.
I mean, I just ran into this problem in the search thing. Like when you do searches, there's params that are in the URL, and the backend will completely ignore what's in some of the params, depending on many rules, regulations, and kind of things that happen. And what we were seeing is that the front end wasn't kind of like mimicking exactly what the back end was doing, because the front end was like looking at the URL params, and the back end's like, you sent epics, but that's not allowed, so it's going to be blobs. But we don't update the URL. There's no way for us to like manipulate what's in the browser, that I know, without redirects, which is like,
Yeah.
So it's very strange. And I started digging into it, and I was trying to explain to the person I was like pairing with, I'm like, there's too many rules. Like the backend has rules that like I'm having to dig into this code to figure out, and I'm nervous to try to like maybe even replicate some of these checks in the front end. Maybe we just ignore what's in the URL, like, because the backend's doing that, and then kind of just let the backend send you what's happening. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, you got me excited. I want to share. This is my favorite thing that we do sometimes from the back end front end communication. Let me see if I can share my screen real fast. Where am I trying to go? I want to go to the code. I think I'm gonna look for something like approvals. Let me see if I can do this. If I search for something like this inside of approvals. No. I'm not finding it, or maybe we got rid of it. It's been a long time. Let me see if this works. Yeah, this has probably changed a lot. Oh, no, it's here in mappers. Yes. All right. Yeah, it's such a weird name for a module. Mappers. Not a great name. I'm sorry for that. This takes our backend state and transforms it into a what would be a view model, the front end state that's really, really helpful. So for instance, like the backend has no, oh yeah, like I guess let me see. Oh yeah. Because with approvals, we had so many crazy rules of like an approval has a project default, but then it can also be overridden on the merge request itself. And the approval can have like hidden groups inside something because I don't have permission to see all the groups. Like there were so many crazy states we ran into here that rather than just peppering all those conditions throughout the front end, and when they didn't totally belong in the back end, because it was about like, because it was presentational state, having like a single source of truth for what transforms the backend model into the very easily consumable single source of truth for the presentation model was really helpful. What encouraged me of like, okay, this is helpful. It backenders were able to make changes here without touching any view components, and that was really powerful. I say this because this is the other option for some of that single source of truth questions is like, okay, if we can't touch the backend because maybe it's an API that's hardened, we just can't change that. Somehow then creating some sort of intermediary model, either on the front end or the back end, that then this is the single source of truth for what we wish the model kind of was like at this state. That kind of thing can be super helpful too. Yeah. This thing is old. Yeah. This is like one of the first features that I was excited to work on.
So in that particular mapper, you basically take the response from the backend and you're remapping it. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so there's some like responses from the backend, and then there's also like the initialization data, and all of it is just remapping it into a model that's very friendly to the components, and that way view components can be very just presentationally dumb. I don't have to do all these calculations, and because when components are complicated, that's the most complicated, I think, front end code that we get. Now, Vuex might be the most complicated front end code that we get.
But I wonder, could this have been done in backend helpers anyways? Because that's a nice pattern that we sometimes use to, where we just remap some data in the helper, still in the backend, and then we provide it through Hamel.
Yeah, and we do that as well. So we did that with the top nav. We created like a view model that could be used and consumed by the front end from the back end, because the back end had all the information. So that it wouldn't have worked out for us to it would have been unnecessary for us to build the view model on the front end because the back end has all the information. So but yeah, we'll do this on the back end as well. So but I think officially we're supposed to use presenters. I don't know exactly what presenters are in Rails world. It sounds right. But I guess it's like, hey, I'm not interfacing with merge request model anymore. I'm interfacing with merge request presenter, which looks a lot like the model. It's just, I don't know. I guess it's like the model's friend that is like, presenting like, hey, I'm going to tell you all the nice things about this guy. Terry, do you have like background information on like what the presenters are and how they're supposed to actually be used?
I have only used them very briefly here. I know there's some docs around presenters, but that might at least have some guide. Oh no, they're very brief guidelines. It's here. I'll put it in the chat, but yeah, the guidelines are I guess it's succinct, very brief and very to the point. But it's, to me, I thought it was like to prevent having to use a bunch of instance variables in your views. My experience with sending data to the back end, or from the back end to the front end, is more like we get stuff in some sort of JSON object that we stick in the HAML, and then the front end takes it and goes and does magic with it.
Yeah, we might not really need this. This seems like presenters for building like complex HAML pages. So these seem like
I thought, yeah,
that makes sense. That's interesting.
Look, there's more documentation that's in the repository.
It's interesting how this links to .com and not like.
Yeah.
Oh, but this is the README of that.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
So I thought it was to kind of like, get logic into a place that might be easier to test it, get it out of the view.
Yeah.
Search notoriously has a lot of instance variables in our views. So I've been trying to refactor some of that out, but yeah, it's hard.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I feel like this does help with testing for sure, because
it does.
I feel like testing a HAML file versus testing like a presenter. To me, it feels easier to write tests for the presenter code.
Yeah, this is interesting, and it's interesting even to consider. Yeah, this is all, I think, uncharted decision tree territory of like, because we even have those like backend Rails components, and that actually might be more. In some ways, that might be more appropriate than using a presenter like this. Presents label as label. Rails is weird. I feel like this might be like.
CSS is weird.
CSS is weird too. Yeah.
I just learned yesterday that there's no center tag. Or that there was, and now it's gone. Well, like in my head, if you want to center something, why wouldn't you just use a tag called center and then it just works? But that doesn't seem like that's how that works. So.
That's a good idea, though. Have you seen? There's a really good coding webcomic called, what is it called? I don't remember what it's called. It has a really one of the ones that stuck around me the most was there's the very new front end engineers asking the senior front end engineers something like asking something like oh, hey, I'm having trouble like vertically aligning this this image on the container, can you help me out? And the senior engineer says, oh yeah, it's just vertical align center, and if you need to do it horizontal line, it's like horizontal line center. It's like, oh, thanks, that's great. But the other person says, that was cruel, that's not that, or like, that's not how it is. It's like, I know, but everyone has to learn the hard way of CSS is since the introduction of Flexbox, it has like solved all alignment problems, but before then was vertically aligning was so gnarly. All right, cool. Yeah, more we don't have a whole lot of time for code review pairing. I want to double check that if there's some MR that someone wanted to all hop in and we could all review together. Maybe we could prioritize doing that since we don't have a lot of time left. Otherwise, we can keep plowing through discussion topics. Where are you allowed? Well, I have like a
update.
What'd you say?
No, sorry. I was just gonna say that I just have some dependency updates MRs, so pretty boring stuff.
No, that's not interesting. Sorry, I don't mean to say your work's not interesting, but it's not.
You can say it. That's fine.
Yeah, I have a handful of MRs to review, but I think and they seem small and maybe not something to be really interesting to do right now. I did really want to ask all of your thoughts on this communication topic, especially when communicating with people from the wider community, and really curious to know if if anyone has ever had a situation where maybe the communication didn't go super well because you assumed that the contributor didn't know something, so you kind of over explained it, and so then they felt like, oh, what do you mean, you don't think I know this? And have you all ever ran into that, which can happen on occasion when we do so much async communication? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do you communicate, especially maybe MRs from the wider community that require some level of, oh, here's a suggestion, and I don't know how much context and how much explanation I should give without, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I've never run into this specific case, but I think the worst that has happened to me is having to close the contributors MR because we actually didn't really need to implement what they were trying to do. I felt that was kind of embarrassing, and I think that we need to be really careful about how we refine issues and which issues we open up to the community, right? Because people put a lot of effort and time into their MRs, and having to just close those MRs, it's kind of harsh, I feel. So yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. It does happen. Yeah, that's tough. I feel like I know that I don't have an example off the top of my head, but I know that I've come across where I think I left the comment. I don't think it came across like I was being patronizing, but I think a community contributor could have taken it that way, because they did respond with something like, oh yeah, I know about this, but knowing about this, that's why I did this, whatever. And that's cool. It's like, oh great. And I hope that when I'm over explaining, I over communicate, because we're asynchronous and I have no context, so I'm just over communicating. So I don't know what your thoughts are on over communicating versus, I don't know, potentially hurting people's feelings because.
Yeah, I think I had a potential situation for that, not on a big scale. But I've got a merge request to review with CSS changes. That's where, well, in my opinion, completely against good practices. But like, if I remember myself like 5 years ago, that would probably be how I would also solve it. So what I did, I basically listed like what I think that would fix in, and what would be the situation that it fixes, and also like outline how different this case is. So like, okay, it should work here, but we also use it in 15 other components, so then we need to take that into account. So I think like asking clarifying questions, but also like rephrasing like what their solution they wrote, and making sure I also understand what they wanted to do. That's a good practice here. But I also guess, some people might just get defensive anyway. You can never fix all the problems or like address all the issues.
And that, right, and that's definitely a factor. You can't expect to please everybody, and some people are just going to take things the wrong way or whatever. I like your example though of trying to meet where the contributor is coming from, but then also it sounded like you're able to use problem specific information about these specific classes or whatever that were being reused. And this is why, that more tangible reason of like why we want to go a different route. I think that carries a lot more weight than whenever it's like, oh, some very vague, fuzzy, like, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that sometimes as engineers, we can be really realistic of like, this isn't functional enough, or like, or whatever it is. And it's not saying that the CSS isn't like that, but just like whatever it is, we can get, I know that I can get hyper fixated on like, oh, there's another way to do it. There's a better way, but there's not really a tangible reason to do it that way here. And so that's always something to sift through on my end. But finding a tangible reason for this is already being reused elsewhere like this, so we got to do it this way, that goes a long way.
But I also think like conveying your preference is okay. Like saying I like to do it this way, but then also asking, what do you think about that? And do you think that's a way you can implement and you would like that to be solved this way?
Yeah. It's so bringing that up. I'll bring up, I do over communicate so much. So I use those like code review labels, the conventional comments all the time to just leave non-blocking thoughts and non-blocking preferences. I'm just over communicating because we don't get to communicate a whole lot. We have this asynchronous cycle. So that's great. Cool. Yeah. What were we gonna say, Kasia?
I was gonna say, like, I think so. Your original question is, I think, like, how much should we give to a person without making them feel bad about like you thinking they don't know anything or nothing? So I think my approach would be, if it's an outside contributor, that I probably wouldn't feel bad about saying like, oh, have a look at this link and have a look at this link, and you know, and this is how we usually do it, and so basically like give them quite a bit of information, even like high level, because you don't know how much they know. But if it's someone from GitLab, then that changes things dramatically, I think, because you don't want to be like, oh yeah, have a look at this link and this link, and then sorry, maybe not dramatically, but I think we should probably be a little bit more careful about like giving them really like very simple, like basically kindergarten programming advice, because they might think like, oh, you think very little of me. You know what I mean?
I know that's what I'm thinking in my head. It's like I know that if someone wrote me a comment, I'm trying to think of, I don't know, if someone said, hey, we could do this recursively. Recursion is like where a function can actually reference another function itself. You want to make sure you always have a terminating, like they just start teaching recursion to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would feel very funny about it.
I got to like Google like Git rebase at some point, and I was like, I've been doing rebase for like years now.
But I get though the like I don't think I would feel bad. I think I would just realize, I think I would feel maybe misunderstood, but that's not me. Like I get our communicate. There's so much static that goes on in the asynchronous communication that I get where we are over communicate. I have no problem with over communication. On this topic,
I feel like I have a question before you move on.
No, you're good.
Yeah, I guess I link to people's things all the time, but not to this, mostly to our guidelines. I also, unfortunately, we're trying to get more folks to like contribute to search, but having it interact with an additional technology stack outside of like the normal things that you can get running in GDK, it does, I feel like, help. It hinders people from contributing.
I didn't get to. I was gonna say a thanks to you on the thanks channel or something, but I had to get Elasticsearch running on GDK, and it was no problem at all.
No, it wasn't just me, I'm sure, but hopefully, I think you've probably seen my name on the documentation.
I did. I saw your name on the documentation. I was like, nice. This is so easy. Thanks for working on it.
So, yeah, well, I'm glad it was not so bad. I'm trying. I want to push some of our reviews out of our team more often. I feel like sometimes our team tends to hold the reviews, especially within the backend code within our team. And I don't know how I feel like sometimes that I like sharing sharing knowledge about like our feature with other folks, but there's definitely a lot. Our front end engineer has no one else on our team. So all of his reviews come from folks outside of our team. And he often receives feedback that like they can't get the GDK up and running with Elasticsearch, or like, you know, there's a lot of question back and forth about how that goes. So
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I've never thought to like, I don't know. I'm not sure what to do with community contributors. At least I feel like at least linking to GitLab ways of doing things can often help like lessen the blow, as like, oh, it's not coming from me and my preference. Like this is just how we do things here.
Yeah, yeah. I strongly suggest every team, like when you consider how we write our code, and how we write our documentation and just the processes, the wider community should be like the primary audience, because that serves us so much, because then we put extra context into issues. We are able to onboard new team members way easier. Wider community isn't able to contribute if things aren't maintainable. So I highly recommend just everybody really treat the wider community as a primary audience, because that helps everybody out. And that just goes with our values too, of like very low context changes going a long way. Yeah. On this topic, I'd love to hear on the topic of potential over communication that hurts people's feelings. I would love to hear what you all think would be like, what would be taking it too far. And most people at GitLab are awesome, so people don't. But like, to understand, yeah, this isn't the way to communicate, and maybe this is how we should communicate. What is like not the way to communicate when it comes to mentoring, or maybe there's some level of gap of knowledge?
I think we should probably assume that people that are here and let's say got into a mid, like we don't have any juniors. If we did, it would be a slightly different story. But like when we already like at the mid level, we can assume a certain level of knowledge from people, and so we should probably not like explain something unless they ask specifically, like, hey, can you explain to me Git rebase, because I haven't used it a lot. But if that wasn't the case, then like it's kind of unnecessary to do that, I think, because then it just makes the person think like, oh, like they must think very little of me, like, and it's not even a part of the issue that we've been talking about, but the instructions that I was kind of given had a Git rebase instructions in it, and I'm like, oh, so first you have to get the freshest master, so you do Git rebase. So to me, it was like a spare, like it didn't add anything to it, because it just made me feel a little bit like, oh, okay, that's fine. Yeah. I knew how to do this, but that's all right. It's just something very basic. We should probably, unless specifically asked, like probably try not to go there. That's what I usually do.
Yeah.
I used to organize meetup for like beginner Python developers, and we had a Discord there, so people could ask questions. And we had a rule, like whoever is asking a question, even if it's about a super basic thing, you assume they're super smart, but just haven't seen that yet. So like have that mindset, even though they're quite like they asking a super simple question, and like the first thought that comes to your mind is like, how can they not know that? So yeah, just assume they're super smart and they will get it if they just need information. But what I also try to do is like not just like pushing that basic information at people, but maybe link a resource and then ask if they want more information, or if there's something else I need to clarify. Because like I guess like when you just throw a bunch of links or like an instruction right away, that might be a bit of off-putting.
I that's a really, really great rule. I love that. And I think that should apply to how we talk to the wider community of assuming everyone's really smart, very capable software engineers. So that first round of review will make suggestions. But then, yeah, if they have questions or need help with anything, that's great. That's just the one little gap of knowledge we'll focus on. I love that idea.
I mean, people miss things all the time. I think, like, if you see something that is like, oh, this is a bit weird, like, then it's maybe it's because they had a bad day, or like they just missed it. Like it happens all the time. So I never think less of people when they send me something slightly silly, unless it's like really, but that never happens. It just, yeah, with this level, it never happens really.
Yeah.
Assume best intentions, one of our values, right? So.
It's in there somewhere. Yeah, it's in there somewhere. Yeah, that's interesting. Cool. No, thanks for talking about that. Because I am really passionate and interested in like how we communicate asynchronously, and that's why I use the conventional comments a lot, which I do think goes a long way of help setting the tone of a comment, because often I'm just leaving a suggestion, but I won't ask questions and I just leave a suggestion. And I love it when it gets rejected, because like, yes, I was just trying to leave a suggestion, not saying you have to do it this way.
Yeah, I feel like I want suggestion to be like a conversation starter and not necessarily, unless it's like, you know, I've tried to start using issues when it's like, oh, this is an issue type of conventional comment, like you need to fix this because it's violating some like GitLab rule, versus like, this might be done better. What do you think? Or like this might be done a different way, not necessarily better, but like, what do you think about this alternative thing? And because I want to give good code reviews that make people not upset.
Well, I kind of like overuse suggestion. It is worth using issue when there is an issue, because then when it is just a suggestion, that now means more. I'll use issue maintainability a lot, of like, hey, this all works, but this is a maintainability issue, and try to pair it with actually a patch of like, here's a different approach. But for some things that's like, okay, no, this is just a to-do. Like this violated something, or we have a ESLint thing we're disabling here, or Rublecop, whatever. I'll leave to-dos. I'll do that as a comment, because it's like, this is an issue. I can't merge it without this. And it's just something we got to polish up or do whatever. So I'll leave to-do comments. That can be helpful too. Yeah, we're at time. Sorry, I know Kasia, you had a last question here.
That's right.
I think Kasia, I'm going to answer your question really quickly. Your question was fantastic, which is, do you feel like backend is sending front end too much data that's not even used? The answer is a strong yes. That happens a lot. I mean, GraphQL is supposed to be the solution to that, but even when we just have the data that initializes the app, we had a large security issue, because rather than rendering just a slice of the project model, we accidentally sent the whole project model down in the YAML. And I can say this because the issue is public now, but and we resolved it and put in gates to prevent that. But yeah, it's something that we have to keep an eye on. That's a good question.
Yeah, like at some point, I think we might want to look into like, how much data are we actually using? Can we shave something off, like the performance, and so many issues with the performance, and the spinner spinning comes from us just not thinking, sure, let's just return the entire thing, and then
that's a good question.
In my last company, this was like the thing that we were focusing on, because for a long time everything was sent back and no one really cared, because it was a fast delivery, cookie cutter, and
yeah. Cool. Well, thanks everyone for hopping on. Hope you all have a great rest of the day. I'll see you later. Bye.